Welcome to America Uncanceled. In the wake of COVID-19 and a massive vaccine advocacy campaign led by the federal government, mysterious cases of people dropping to the ground and being hospitalized, that's become increasingly common. Why are healthy people suffering heart attacks? And why are top athletes no longer able to push their bodies without paying a price? Joining us today to discuss the mysterious rise in sudden deaths, as well as a slew of topics that I have so many questions to ask about, is Chief Medical Officer for the Unity Project, Dr. Robert Malone. Dr. Malone, Matt and I are so excited to have you join us. Not only are you our neighbor out by the beautiful area in Virginia, but also the fact that you've gone through so much as they've tried to pretty much character assassinate you through suspending you and not letting you raise important questions.
Well, thanks a lot for having me, and thanks a lot for being a good. It's been one of the great pleasures of this road that we've all been on, and some might say the road to hell. It feels like it in some ways, but meeting people like yourselves and the opportunity to participate in CPAC and make so many new friends all over the world has just been one of the diamonds of the experience over the last 3 years. Totally unexpected, and who would ever think that a guy in his 60s getting ready to retire and just raising horses suddenly gets thrust on the world stage and has to learn to swim in the world of new media. But here we are.
You know, Dr. Malone, we literally do live down the road from each other, and we were talking about how we might call you the farmer in the dell, or maybe you're the farmer who survived hell. But we all know how it took a certain amount of courage, as it does in each of these insane moments when the media and corporate interests demand that we must think a certain thing. And some of these people work with people who have always been credible, and you want to believe them, and then but the facts just belie it. So talk about this CPAC experience. I remember, sweetheart, having Dr. Malone speak at CPAC, cautioning people on what they were hearing on medical advice, was really, I think, courageous and controversial. Yeah. For him to speak up, for us to give him a platform, but tragically, so much of what you said has turned out to be right. Mm-hmm.
I like the way you frame that, tragically. I take no pleasure in these predictions or warnings that I've put out over the last 2 years at least, and really 3, coming to pass, and seeing the unnecessary death and destruction and disease that could have been avoidable. I also take no pleasure in in having identified the risks associated with corporate media and the propaganda campaign that's been waged on us, the defamation and gaslighting, particularly of the vaccine injured, all now being revealed on Twitter. This is not giving me joy. I mean, it's nice to be validated, but in terms of that hit on CPAC, where we did this group discussion with myself, Dr. Oz, and this physician that I'd never heard of before, Dr. Brooke Miller, who also turns out just lives right up the road, is one of the top cattlemen in the United States with his Angus herd. His Angus herd is stunning, and he's a practicing primary care physician, and he's now my primary care physician. I'm so grateful to have him in my life and be able to listen and learn from his very grounded, practical advice on managing my own situation. I'm still suffering from the effects of vaccine damage. I talk to these people that are vaccine damaged, and often they forget that I'm also vaccine damaged, and I still have problems with my hypertension. So that was a seminal moment when we all walked on stage, and I'd not met either of the two gentlemen before.
Doc, I have the same doctor as you, Dr. Miller. And I'm not that happy he's in my life because he's really on my butt about like getting in shape and everything else. The good news is I'm listening to him, but most doctors don't take such a personal interest in your life. He is a special doctor. We really do. We cherish these friends that we've made out where real people live.
That's right. But let's get right into these issues. I have so much to ask Dr. Malone. One is obviously you wrote about in your Substack the cardiac arrest in athletes, what is known and knowable. One of the highlights that you brought up here is the fact that we're starting to see this pattern of people dying suddenly. These athletes, this pattern of myocarditis. Walk us through what evidence is out there and why you're seeing such resistance still coming from CDC and so many of, kind of these folks trying to basically stop any of this information from coming out.
The data that are flooding out from all over the world now are extremely threatening to the federal government. That's the truth of the matter. And we have it in the New York Times in February of last year, their column in which they revealed that the CDC has become a political arm of the White House. The CDC has been weaponized. It's no longer functioning as intended, as a neutral arbiter of truth in public health, in acquiring and reporting the data on what's taking place. And they have become a political arm of the White House. So this is backed by the New York Times and the multiple reports that came out last fall internally from the CDC, including one that was basically done by the Senior Executive Service. And for those that aren't DC Illuminati, that translates to the deep administrative state, the Senior Executive Service. These are the people that really run the government and can't be fired. And they did analyses, and I think that probably the New York Times piece in February must have had a leaked copy of those reports based on what they said. But the New York Times reported that the CDC has been withholding data from physicians, medical care providers, public health officials, all the way through this outbreak, information both about the vaccines and about the disease itself. So we're in a situation now where the CDC has worked itself down into a set of lies that they've had to perpetuate and defend. And unfortunately for them, those of us that have been speaking out saying, no, this is what the risk appears to be, this is the risks that may manifest, you need to be careful and avoid vaccinating your children because there's no reason to do so, and it puts them at risk of things like myocarditis. All of this has been denied by this massive, massive propaganda campaign, the likes of which the world has never seen before. Now, I spent 2 hours on various broadcasts yesterday with Mr. Ed Dowd, who's been at the forefront of capturing the data relating to what the insurance industry is discovering, because you all know that insurance actuaries in the insurance industry is very, very dependent on accurate data on death and disability. Mm-hmm. And so independent of the governments and the CDC and the White House spin and all of that, the insurance industry has no choice. You know, they have SEC filings. They can't spin the data. They have to disclose what's going on. They have to disclose the hits that they're taking in their profit margins as a consequence of this surge of death and disease. And what their data has shown, and this is then backed by, I'm just going to do a book pump here. For my friend Ed Dowd in the book Cause Unknown, which is actually outselling my own book. But what's important with Ed's book is it documents in a very clear and persuasive way the surge in excess all-cause mortality that corresponds in time. So I'm choosing my words carefully. I'm not saying this is due to vaccines, but there is a clear correlation with the population that were mandated to receive the vaccines. These are the people that are well employed, have good jobs, and with those jobs come insurance plans for death and disability. Typically, the company will pay for these. And what those data show from the actuarial tables is that with the onset of the mandates for vaccination, we saw a sudden surge in all-cause mortality in those very populations that tend to be younger, healthier, highly employed, compared to the rest of the population and compared to historic baselines.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Right.
you have to say, to be objective, you have to say, what changed?
Yeah.
What is the new variable? And what Ed is hearing, because he's been at the forefront of disclosing this information as a Wall Street analyst, former BlackRock investment analyst, Ed has latitude to say things that I can't say because he's not a medical professional. He's not held to the same standards. He's held to different standards. And as an analyst, his business is to make forward-looking projections. So he has said all along that the data indicate that there's been fraud in covering up these adverse events, and that the insurance actuarial data suggest that there has been a major surge, statistically almost impossible to account for anything other than this change in the implementation of vaccine mandates in this employed population. And now what we're seeing is a massive increase in disability claims and disability in general in the population of people available for work. And what Ed is hearing as a consequence of his leadership here and his recognized position is from people deep on the Hill and in the administration that because of what happened with that NFL event, and I didn't want to speculate about Presley that just died yesterday at 50-something.
54. Yep.
Yeah. And these other data points suddenly, and by the way, there's a Rasmussen poll out recently that clearly documents that a large fraction of our population, and it's skewed a little bit, in terms of party affiliation, but the U.S. public is now increasingly skeptical of the assertion that there's no relationship between this surge of sudden unexplained death and the uptake of the vaccines, and they're asking questions. And so now the administration has got a problem.
Right.
They have years of video in which they are denying and suppressing, and then we have the Twitter files and the involvement of the FBI and the CIA and Homeland Security in trying to suppress any of this information, and yet the data are now so overwhelming they're going to have to address it. And what Ed is hearing is the White House right now is on the horns of the dilemma of what the heck are we going to do, and that the current proposed spin that he's hearing about is that they want to attribute these unexplained deaths to the disease itself, COVID-19.
As opposed to,
and just wait for it. They're also actively